Is your recipe safe to can? I want to talk to you a little bit today about recipes and how you can know if that recipe is safe to can or not. Now, when you are looking at a recipe, you want to look at every single ingredient in that recipe to determine if it's safe to can. And just because an ingredient is safe to can does not mean it's safe to mix with other ingredients. An example of that might be butter, milk, some dairy things. And so those are safe to can with, by themselves, or with like ingredients, like several dairy items, like the Alfredo sauce that I canned recently. But you would not mix those with meat or with vegetables. Now, an easy way for you to find out about each ingredient is to go to the National Center for Home Preservation, and you would have to look up each ingredient to see if that ingredient is cannable. And if it's cannable, you need to write down whether it needs to be water bath canned or if it needs to be pressure canned. And then make a list of all of you've got a list of all of your ingredients, and you see how much time is on each one of them. If one single ingredient in that recipe has to be pressure canned, then the whole recipe has to be pressure canned. So that's one of your rule of thumbs. Okay, so if your recipe is a mixture of meat and vegetables, or if it's a recipe that has vegetables, but it has like pinto beans or any kind of a dried beans or peas, it automatically has to be pressure canned. The difference between pressure canning and water bath canning has to do with the acid level in it. It also has to do with the temperature of it. Water bath canning, you cannot get the temperature in a water bath canner that you could get in a pressure canner. Now, I consider myself a generational canner, and what I mean by that is that I can a lot of things that are like my mother and my grandmother and my aunts and different people in my family, my mother-in-law, the way they canned things. But I also look at the guidelines from various universities in the country and for the National Center for Home Preservation. And I'll give you an example. My aunt gave me her recipe for canning sausage. Most of our grandparents and, even some of our parents would kill hogs every year, and they made their own sausage. They seasoned it themselves, and then they canned it. And what they would do was they would fry that sausage and put it in a jar, and then pour the hot grease over top of it and flip the jar upside down, and it would seal. And they did that for a long time. But when she told me that, I said, no, that's a meat, and in order to kill any bacteria in it, I want it pressure canned. So I did her whole process exactly the way that she always did it, but instead of turning it upside down, I put it in the pressure canner. And my sausage is just fine. And so you got to look at your ingredients and decide, are they acidic or are they non-acidic? If they're acidic, like lemons, oranges, some other fruits are acidic. Or if you're adding acid, like if you're adding vinegar to pickled things, or maybe you're adding lemon juice to something, then that's something you probably could water bath. But if there's no acid in it, then it automatically has to be pressure canned. And I know lots of the old people used to water bath and keep it on the boil, in boiling water for 6 hours, whatever it was. But that does not get the temperature up high enough for the food to kill the botulism spores out of it. So you want to water bath only acidic, because the acid in those foods is going to help kill the bacteria. Now, the other thing you're going to want to look at with your ingredients list, if your recipe calls for dairy, milk, cheese, butter. Now, I will say this about butter. If your recipe maybe you have to saute some onions or something like that, and you've put a tablespoon of butter in a skillet to saute a big skillet full of vegetables, there's not enough butter in that to hurt anything, but you could use olive oil for that process anyway. So you don't want to have any dairy products in your recipe. You don't want any grains in your recipes. Now, I know like some soups call for barley. Barley is a grain. You don't want grain in your recipe. You don't want your recipe to spoil because you put something like that in it. So, and then thickeners. Flour, cornstarch, you do not want those in your recipe. Now, there is a product called Clear Gel that has been tested and is okay to use as a thickener. That's how you can use that to make pie fillings and things like that. And then nuts and nut butters. You do not want those in a recipe. And so then when you start mixing ingredients, like, if all of your recipe is vegetables, just make sure that each of your vegetables is a cannibal vegetable. And find out which one of them has to be processed for the longest period of time. And like I said, if it's got dried beans in it, it's automatically going to be the dried beans. But, it might be your potatoes or your green beans or, something like that. But look on the National Center for Home Preservation and see which one of those vegetables has to be processed for the longest length of time. And that's what your recipe would be processed on. Now, some of y'all are going to see a video from me over the next few days where I'm going to be doing meatloaf. And you might think, okay, now meatloaf has got eggs in it and it's got grains in it, or it's got breadcrumbs, or, it's got crackers, just depends on the recipe. But what I do in order to have the flavor of a meatloaf in a jar is to mix my ground beef with some diced onions, maybe add some tomato sauce or, something like that to it. Just whatever vegetables and seasonings I want in it, peppers or whatever. And then I fry that all together, but it's fried like a ground beef. It's not in a loaf. And then I put that into my jar and process it just like I would if I was processing ground beef, like the video that I did recently. And that gives me the flavor, it's textured more like a ground beef, but it's flavored like a meatloaf that I can serve like a meatloaf. Of course, I can, if I'm having company or something like that, I'm going to make a meatloaf. But if I want a quick meal for my family, that would be meatloaf. Then I can open that jar and just heat that and have it with whatever sides I want with it, and that's a meatloaf. It gives us the same flavor. So think about these things when you're looking at your recipes. And I'd appreciate it. Any of you that have a recipe that you're curious about, put your list of ingredients in the comments, and let's look at it and see if it looks like it's a cannibal recipe. And I'll give you feedback on it. So, but anyway, keep me posted on your recipes if you think you've got something that you would like to can. And be sure and subscribe to my channel. Like and subscribe so you'll get notification when new videos come out. Until next time, God bless you.